Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the CIH podcast. My name is Matthew Scott. I'm CIH's Policy Manager for Net Zero and Sustainability. And today's episode is all about unpacking the Warm Homes Plan. Joined today by two fantastic guests who are going to take us through everything that was announced a couple of Wednesdays ago. We firstly got Eve O'Regan, who is a senior researcher at the Social Market Foundation, and we've got Laura Fordyce, who is a business development manager at Warmworks. Neve and Laura are going to be your expert guides today, taking us through what was in the Warm Homes Plan, and we're going to have a little bit of a conversation, particularly about what it means for housing providers and also, of course, for the housing professionals that work for them. So, Neve and Laura, thank you first of all for joining us today. We finally, after what's felt like several years, if not more, we have a document called the Warm Homes Plan. It is backed with £15 billion of government funding. It feels like quite a significant moment. So before we get into any of the detail, can you just give me your initial reactions to what this moment means, particularly for housing providers and housing professionals? How big a moment is this? Considering how long we've been waiting for a plan like this. Neve, I'll go to you first.
I think it's very important considering, as you said, it's taken a long time to get here. It feels like you said, it's been coming for ages and ages. So it's really nice to finally have it. I think what is so important about it is how it gives the industry certainty. Any work that we've done at the Social Market Foundation in the past has really reiterated the importance of policy certainty and knowing the government's direction of travel. And I think it really outlines that and where the government is planning to go with warm homes for the future.
Laura, over to you. Do you want to come in on that question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think we're quite used to waiting sometimes for government policy to come out. So pleased to finally see it here and published. We know that warm and healthy homes that are affordable to heat, it's a key objective for social landlords and housing professionals across the sector. So it's great to see that focus in the plan about reducing tenants' energy bills and tackling fuel poverty. And as Neve said, given social landlords that clarity and assurance on some of those areas that they've been waiting for. So we've now got a clear direction of travel that the UK government's looking to take about energy efficiency and decarbonisation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think in the sort of the few conversations that we've had with our members in the 2 weeks since it was published, that clarity, that direction setting, and that real forward look, not just to 2030, but to 2035 and beyond as well, potentially is what has been highlighted as something that they feel is really good. And the plan itself, there's too much probably to unpack in one podcast. The plan itself was some 170 odd pages long. We also had various consultations published alongside it. There was some consultation responses published with it. So there's an awful lot there to get through. So we'll try and focus in on some of the key areas in the rest of the podcast. I think the really interesting thing that I wanted to pick up first is in the couple of discussions I've had with members about this so far, one of the things I've said is that almost that dogma of fabric first seems to have slipped away. And there's a huge focus in the Warm Homes Plan on low carbon technology, particularly solar PV and batteries, but also, of course, heat pumps. So, Neve, I wondered, could you just maybe summarize a little bit about what the plan says about low carbon technology and some of the energy bill savings that come with it?
Yeah, so I think it generally feeds into this broader conversation about energy security and volatility of fossil fuels, and that's why we've come on to much more of I suppose, a technology model rather than the moving away from fabric first. So as part of it, the government said that they want Britain to be a clean energy superpower and to drive that through rooftop solar being a big part of it. And they're really going for, in the plan, a whole home approach for that to make that a reality for people, and with that going to the energy savings. So we've got plans for rooftop solar, energy storage, so batteries, and also clean heat. And the ideal with all of that is that obviously your solar panels will generate your electricity for you, your battery will be able to store whatever you're not using at the time, and then release it, say, in the winter time when it's less sunny and you need the heat a bit more. And when you have that package all together, they've sort of calculated that households could save up to £550 a year on their energy bill compared to when they're using a gas boiler. And another, I suppose, part of it that we like to see is that there's a bit of a focus on making sure that rooftop solar isn't limited to high income households, and so that the low and middle income households see the benefits of that microgeneration. And I think that's where the cost savings, the energy bill savings are really going to be felt and appreciated on the basis that does all work together.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would agree again on that. I mean, solar PV is a technology that's been around now for some time. I think most people are relatively familiar with it, even people that are not working in the retrofit sector, and it's quite an easy concept to understand. I think we probably still need to do a little bit of myth busting about it, because you do hear people sometimes say, oh, well, it doesn't work in places that aren't sunny, like Scotland, for example, but we know that isn't the case. I think battery storage again is a bit of a newer technology, not so familiar to some people, but certainly a lot of the work we've done, we've seen the benefits of having those technologies installed together, particularly again with heat pumps. And I think good to see the plans to sort of scale up heat pump installations as well set out in the plan, providing a bit of certainty again there about the supply chain. So yeah, and I think just touching on the point you said there, Neve, as well, about access to these technologies for low and middle income families as well. So they're not just for high income households that want to be sort of at the forefront of the green transition. A lot of our work that we do is supporting low income households that are in some cases quite vulnerable and need that extra support and guidance. But we've shown through the work that we've done that they're also able to benefit from those types of technologies if we've got the right support and guidance in place and that sort of effective engagement.
Yeah, you've talked a little bit, Laura, about some of those advantages of doing all of these technologies together. And I think we've known through sort of previous work and other conversations that I think if you just put a heat pump in a home, sometimes the impact on bills is not going to be what it is if you do PV at the same time, and you've got a smart meter, and potentially you've then got the access to one of the smart tariffs as well that can help you optimize when you're going to use the electricity, when you're going to store, those kinds of things. Could you say a little bit more about that, Laura? I know you've had a lot of experience delivering these kinds of things in practice. So just about some of the advantages that can bring doing those things together.
Yeah, definitely, and that was something that I was keen to mention because, as you say, Matthew, we've done quite a few projects now where we've installed those three measures. Sometimes that has been upgrading existing electrically heated systems, and other projects and homes we've been moving off gas onto heat pumps along with the PV and the battery. And we've had some great feedback and some great data coming through on those. We had a project a couple of years ago where one tenant was reporting their electricity costs had fallen to as little as £7 a week. Another tenant said they had 89%, well, the data showed that they had 89% of their electricity coming from the solar. So real massive shift and changes and having an impact on their energy bills and their quality of life.
Okay, and the final thing I wanted to ask about this, I said at the start that fabric first philosophy that I think has been the government's guiding philosophy for quite a while, or at least across different governments. We've seen it reflected in the design of energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector. It's going to be a little bit different in the social rented sector. Do you think there still needs to be a balance between, going really hard on the low carbon technology, which I think we all agree with and we know we need to do, but also making sure that we continue to reduce the space heating demand of homes so that even where you've got a heat pump and clever kit, you're still not losing heat through the walls or through other bits of the home that might be uninsulated. Neve, I'll come to you first on this one.
Yeah, I definitely think there needs to be still a balance there. I know that in the plan they mention it's around about, I think, 61% of homes that have got loft insulation in them now, which is great, but that is then still there is still a gap there of homes that don't have that. And similarly with cavity wall insulation, I think that's around 70% of homes have that. So while I suppose a lot of those easy measures and easy to install measures have been fit, and that's great, and we're very happy about that, but there is still that gap, and obviously you want to maximize the performance of a home for any heating, whatever the heating system is. Reducing the space heating will reduce your bills. Generally, that's, yeah. And so I do think there needs to be a bit more of a balance. It's good to see that they're getting well behind heat pumps and other low carbon technologies, but fabric can't be forgotten, I suppose.
Fabric can't be forgotten, I think, is one of the micros that we can take out of the Warm Homes plan. And there are, you're right, there are parts in it where I think they're wisely sort of staying away from some of the solid wall stuff, it feels like, but the emphasis on the really simple measures that you can do, the loft top-ups, the draft work, things like that is still quite prominent in a couple of places, which is good to see. Laura, you mentioned before that some of the work that you do, and particularly through your delivery of the government schemes, happens on local grant, but of course we've also got the Social Housing Fund in existence. A lot of CIH members work on both of those schemes. I speak to our members quite a lot who are delivering usually Social Housing Fund, but also sometimes local grants. And the plan says some quite interesting things about the future of those schemes. We know we're going to get a bit of a top up of funding, but there's also this really interesting sort of direction setting around combining the two schemes into one in the future and doing that on a more area-based focus from maybe 27, 28 onwards. So, Laura, given all of your role in all of your role that you have in developing and kind of delivering these schemes, just what's your take on that part of the Warm Homes plan, and what do you think about that kind of promise going forwards that they'll try and reduce them from two into one?
Yeah, I think that's interesting to see that set out in the plan. And as you say, Matthew, we've got quite wide experience at Warmworks of delivering a number of different large scale energy efficiency programs, and that includes schemes that are area-based schemes that we deliver for local authorities in Scotland. We have the contract for the Scottish Government's National Fuel Poverty Scheme, which covers all low-income households that own their own homes across Scotland. We also deliver a number of projects for social landlords in Scotland and deliver the Warm Homes Local Grant Scheme currently for Newcastle City Council. So we've got experience of delivering those different types of schemes and the different funding routes. So I think at the moment it's still a little bit hard to know how exactly it's going to work, because the plan is quite light on the detail of that. So I think we will need to see a little bit more information coming through about how those are going to work. I'm sure there's likely to be benefits and efficiencies in that, and maybe given certainty for supply chains as well. But I think, yeah, we're keen to see a bit more of the detail about that and how that's going to work in practice.
Yeah, I think that I'd agree with Laura. I think that the theory of efficiencies is what's quite exciting, I suppose, about combining the two. But it's the reality of how it actually, I suppose, works out. If it actually will result in less admin and better oversight, and how it will actually work. One of the, I suppose, slight concerns I might have in a way about combining the two is making sure that one group doesn't get deprioritized over the other. So if the social housing fund has gone towards improving social housing, and the local grants have gone to improving homes under average incomes, that if you combine the two, how that's actually split then across communities. And the benefit of it is that it goes to where your community needs it, more so. But the benefits of it there being separate is that you have the guardrails of where exactly it's funded. But yeah, so again, the devil will be in the detail. I'd like to see what it actually looks like when we get a bit more detail on it.
Yeah, and I think they've said in the plan that I think spring is what they're aiming for, to release a little bit more detail about the vision for how those two schemes could work as one. Laura, you mentioned something really interesting when you started there, which was just about your experience of delivering some of the area-based schemes in Scotland. And we know, of course, if we go back sort of 10 years, maybe more, area-based schemes were a thing in England as well. One of my colleagues who works at Newcastle University has said a few times, this is a return to area-based schemes. It's not a turn to area-based schemes. So is there anything from your experience in delivering in Scotland and sort of elsewhere that you think should be included or that could be taken forward as principles into the government's new approach? Is there anything that works really well that you think needs to be replicated, or anything that doesn't work so well that you would like to see not become a part of a new scheme in the future?
I think yes, in our experience, they can work well together. It doesn't need to be an either or approach, that you have a national scheme or you have an area-based scheme. That the system that's set up at the moment in Scotland shows that. So we found there's been quite good efficiencies as well in the areas where we actually at Warmworks deliver both of those schemes. So we've got quite a wide footprint across the islands. So we deliver the area-based schemes for Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles. And those areas have got really high levels of fuel poverty, possibly the highest in Scotland, I think, at the moment. So having that option, that we've got clear criteria set out for eligibility in terms of the customer themselves and in terms of their property's EPC rating, and slightly different measure mixes across the two schemes, it means that we're able to direct customers to the most appropriate scheme for their needs and for their home. So that's certainly worked well for us.
That's interesting. I know one of the other things that Scotland does, which England hasn't, is of course that kind of one-stop. It's not really a one-stop shop, but that one-stop phone line, isn't it? To direct people to the most appropriate thing. And I think that's something else that has been suggested could work well in England before. Okay, we mentioned before, or I mentioned before, the government sort of stepping back from solid wall installation in the Warm Homes Plan. This is particularly off the back of some of the appalling failures that we saw in Eco4. 98% of solid wall installation fitted through Eco4 deemed to have failed in one way or another. And of course, we saw the decision previously in the autumn budget to end Eco from this April. And there's loads of really interesting things we could talk about off the back of Eco. I think there's two things I want to pick up in the podcast. First is the retrofit supply chain. We know that there's a lot of managing agents, a lot of others installers who work on Eco who have almost overnight seen their work dry up when the scheme announced, or when the government announced that the scheme was closing. And that is the very same retrofit supply chain that we need to grow to be able to deliver what's in the Warm Homes Plan. So interested in both of your thoughts on what we need to do going forwards now to help the supply chain grow. How do we get to the level of heat pump installers, solar PV installers, maintenance professionals, electricians, all of the other really skilled roles that we'll need? What's your views on that going forwards? I'll maybe go to Laura first and then Niamh. So Laura, any views on that would be really interesting.
Sure, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if we're going to be scaling up these installations over the next 20 odd years or so to reach the net zero targets, we're going to have that supply chain of qualified accredited installers, and there needs to be sufficient funding available to support that upskilling of people that are working perhaps in gas boiler installations at the moment and want to transition over to heat pump installations, but also having the capacity, I guess, within the training providers and the colleges as well, and promotion around green jobs and green skills and those new careers and renewables that will be of interest to get young people interested in that when they're leaving school and they're thinking about what they want to do going forward. In terms of sort of that approach, at Warmworks, we've been able to grow our supply chain quite significantly and focus in really on having locally based installers across the different parts of the country that we work in. And that's been in part, we've been able to do that in part because we've had a long-term contract, multi-year funding available from Scottish Government specifically for the national scheme. So we've got that. We can show that we've got that pipeline of work coming through and help support those installers to develop their teams, take on more staff, upskill, and so on. So we have a initiative called Warm Start where we support those new jobs and new apprenticeships. We've had a lot of success in that area, and also having support and engagement with schools and colleges. We do that as well. We go out to speak to them about different types of careers and also identifying different pots of funding available to support installers with putting some of their teams through different training courses and so on.
Yeah, I'd completely back up what Laura said there on the workforce side and that side of the supply chain. I think workforce capacity is going to be potentially a little bit of an issue, especially if you want to be sure of things like quality installations as well. I think funding is vitally important, and the question we have at the moment is the current funding available, and what funding's been put in the plan sufficient for small businesses, especially. There's a lot of one-man bands or micro businesses in retrofit, and is that's enough for them to be able to take on an apprentice. And I suppose part of that, and as Laura mentioned as well, that security of work and that definite supply chain, or pipeline even of people of work coming on board, which I think you get some of, as I said at the top of the program, that policy support is really helpful. We've got some of that in the plan with things like MEES being upgraded to EPCC and the Decent Home Standard coming into place. The downside of those, though, is that the timelines for those are a little bit out. And that we've got MEES is coming in, has to be by 2030. Decent Home Standard will be enforced by 2035. But there will be a general election between now and then, which means that those things could be shifted, and those could change again. So while there is that policy support there, it is a little more uncertain. It would be hard to make that more certain, given the political climate. But yeah, it does make me worried for the supply chain in that way, that there's perhaps not as much security in it as some people would like.
Yeah, it's a really good point at the end there, because we have, of course, without discussing any individual parties, we have seen that consensus on climate change fracture over the past 2 or 3 years, where previously it was very cross-party. The Climate Change Act was marshalled through with support of all the major parties at the time. And we're now seeing that consensus fall apart a little bit. And one of the other things that you said, in fact, that both of you touched on, which was really interesting, was actually about the quality and the assurance side of this. So I think what we absolutely don't want to see is the supply chain expand, but that we see some of the same failures that we saw in Eco4 replicated, or at least we see some of the conditions for those failures to take place replicated in whatever comes next for the supply chain. So there's a whole other side of the coin here, which is about consumer protection, in other words, and how we make sure that for anyone coming into work in the retrofit supply chain, they are properly accredited, they've done their qualifications, they have the competencies and the skills and the behaviours that we want for people working inside people's homes, and often quite vulnerable people's homes. So Niamh, I wanted to come to you first on this one. Just what do you make of what the plan sets out in the consumer protection space? Do you think it goes far enough in the things that it sets out and in the direction of travel that it indicates?
I think that it's definitely better in theory than what's been there before. And it seems to, I suppose, directly respond to some of the criticisms that were in the National Audit's report of the failures of Eco4. So having, I suppose, a simpler system with less certification bodies, having that right first time approach, with I suppose, a clear accountability, and redress also a simplified process. Those are all things which the NAO sort of criticised as not being really in place: poor oversight, confusion over redress. So it's really great to see that, first of all, the government are taking consumer protection very seriously, and they understand how important it is to do so. And there are different steps they're going to take. And all those reforms are, I suppose, they're currently in progress rather than set in stone just yet. So I think, again, in theory, it looks good. It looks better than what was there before. In practice, it is also we'll have to see how it goes. And hopefully, in some ways, we won't have to see how it goes, because there will be little to report on. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think all the negative press around some of the failed installation and poor quality installations, it gives retrofit a bad name, really. And that's difficult sometimes then to break through that and showcase when there is good work being done, and showcase the benefits of insulation in particular. So it's good that consumers and homeowners and tenants can feel confident about works that are being done in their home, and then they can understand where they can go to for advice and support if things don't work out how they should. At Warmworks, we are focused very much on high quality, right first time installations. Part of our process when we appoint installers onto our supply chain is checking all those accreditations and certifications to make sure that they are, accredited to install the different types of measures. We do a number of work in progress visits throughout the installation process, again, to verify how things are going, that operatives are meeting health and safety obligations, following all the correct processes and so on. And we do quality inspections, again, after the works have been completed to verify everything. And we found that works really well, because then we're able to provide a really good customer experience and hopefully avoid some of those issues that we've seen on some of these other types of work.
I think what's really important about that process you've just described, Laura, is that when we're doing retrofit works, they're complicated, homes are complicated. We who inhabit those homes are also quite complicated. We use those homes in quite unpredictable ways sometimes. So having all of those different touch points at different parts of the process, which enables you to say, actually, that's not quite as we expected it when we laid out the plan, gives you the opportunity to fix it straight away. It gives you the chance to avoid anything developing afterwards that you're not aware of, which is, I think, where we also need to get to, that we are going to have to see, or we are going to have to acknowledge that sometimes we might have little things wrong, but we identify them as quickly as we can and we put them right as quick as we can. We're coming towards the end of the time that we've got now, so I wanted to give you both the opportunity. We've talked quite narrowly about a couple of the things in the plan that are relevant to CIH members, but there's a whole host of other things across all of the documents that were published a couple of Wednesdays ago. So I'm just interested, are there any other parts of the Warm Homes plan that you both feel are really important and that our members and listeners need to know about? So I'm going to give you one each, if that's okay. So Laura, to you first. What else was in the Warm Homes plan that we should know about and be taking into account?
So I did have a couple, but since you're restricting me to one, I'll go with that.
I'll tell you what, go for the two. Go for the two.
Okay, so quickly.
It's an afternoon.
All right, perfect. So the first one was around overheating. I thought that was quite interesting to see in the plan. Not always something that we think about when you live in the UK, particularly up here in Scotland as well. But we are experiencing changes in our climate. You can see that with, some of the extreme weather that we've had, and last summer being the hottest on record. So I think that it's great that was identified, and that, there are things that we can do to mitigate this when we are both building new homes and retrofitting existing homes. So I was pleased to see reference to that. And then the other thing, just to mention quickly as well, there's obviously a lot of ambition in the plan in terms of locally focused delivery, approaches that are going to work for local communities and local housing stock and different types of houses in those areas. For members that are based in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, it'll be interesting to see how the plan will then impact policy and legislation and targets in each of those nations, because we have our own sets of targets and policy and legislation. So it'd be good to see what impact the plan will have on those. Will that shift slightly in terms of what devolved governments are looking to do, or will that just help them accelerate some of the work that they want to do because they'll gain extra funding as a result? So that was the other point I just wanted to mention.
Thanks, Laura. And Niamh, you can have two as well, seeing as I've allowed Laura two.
Laura very cleverly took one of mine. I was also going to say the overheating adaptation piece, in part because, as Laura said, overheating is becoming an increasingly big issue. And the fact that adaptation has been acknowledged, I think, is a really positive sign. Really looking forward to seeing what happens next. At Social Market Foundation, we're really hoping to do some work on adaptation and overheating specifically. So we'll see if we get to do that. But great to see that it's happening. Especially, I mean, as Laura said, in Scotland, it might not be noticed perhaps as much just yet. But if you, like me, live in London, the past few summers, you have absolutely noticed it. I've taken to putting my hot water bottle into the freezer to cool down my bed for the evening, which is not a sentence I ever thought I'd say. And the other thing I think that's in it, and I touched on it earlier, is that we are getting a new minimum energy efficiency standard for the private rented sector, so a higher standard of EPC-C. Which has been called for a really, really long time. And I think once things like the decent home standard as well comes in, it will make a massive difference to private renters who typically have very little control over what sort of changes are made to their home, if any changes are made at all. So it's really great to see that that's being brought in there to give them those extra protections that they might not otherwise have.
Great, and it's another one that's been a long time coming, hasn't it? I think
Yeah.
the initial consultation was in the previous government, but then sort of was allowed to lapse, and then they confirmed they weren't going to go ahead with it. So to see it come back and eventually get through is a really positive thing, and we're in total agreement about that. So we've reached the end now. I've got one final question that I want to put to you both, which is more the other side. Is there anything that's not in the plan that either of you would have liked to see, or maybe phrasing it differently? Is there anything else that you feel outside of the Warm Homes Plan that government is going to need to return to in the next 2 to 3 years? What is going to rise back up the agenda that they've not put in the Warm Homes Plan, but they're going to need to focus on? So, Niamh, we'll go to you first, and then Laura, you can have the last word.
I'm going to go with something that wasn't in the plan, something that has been floated before. Sort of disappointed not to see is that we have no phase out date for fossil fuel heating systems. It was mooted before as maybe coming in from 2035. And it's sort of been dropped, which means that while government is going all carrot and no stick on this, and I can understand politically why they'd want to do that with I suppose more backlash towards climate policies. But it's still a little disappointing. It does mean that in 2036, 37, we still might be seeing new gas boilers installed in homes, which will make then decarbonising by 2050 quite difficult. And also for preparing those homes for the long stretch to be decarbonised. We can hope that we get there, but yeah, I was sort of disappointed to see that sort of been dropped off.
It's a really interesting point, Niamh. I think one of the things that we talked about with members immediately after the Warm Homes Plan was some of the things that they might have liked to see. And one of the things that we've talked about in the past as well, particularly when we were talking about the social rent sector MEES consultation last summer, was instead of having this quite complicated system where you meet a metric by a certain date and then maybe another metric of your choice, could you just have that phase out in 2035? And that immediately tells the whole social housing sector that they've got to start planning now for their boiler replacement programs to transition into heat pump replacement programs by 2035. It's that certainty, that kind of long-term direction of travel that could have provided. But as you say, they've stepped away from, haven't they? So last word to you, Laura. What is the one thing that wasn't in the Warm Homes Plan that you would have liked to see, or that government will need to work on over the next 2 to 3 years?
I think the thing that's missing that still needs to be addressed and tackled is that cost differential between electricity and gas. I think until that really gets addressed and there's, actual real effort to bring down and make them, give them parity, or at least bring down electricity closer to gas, it's going to be hard to encourage more people to switch over from fossil fuel systems to heat pumps. It's something we hear from our clients and our customers often about that. It's that concern about the ongoing running costs, despite the heat pump efficiencies being higher than the gas boilers. It is that, concern about that. And I think just looking forward really to seeing a bit more detail, as we said, on some of the different areas mentioned in the plan, how that's going to translate into delivery, how we can then start to really get going and meet some of these targets and ambitions in the plan. So we're ready and we're waiting to see what's coming next with that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the things that government officials have said afterwards is you've got the Warm Homes Plan, you've got minimum energy efficiency standards and what that's going to look like for the social housing sector. You've got certainty now around other things like decent home standard. Now it's delivery. That's what you're going to be measured on over the next 2 to 3 years. And that's a really good point to end on. So we're out of time. So nothing more for me to do other than to say thank you so much, Laura and Niamh, for your time and for coming on and discussing this afternoon. It's been really, really interesting. And there's so much more we could have talked about, but hopefully we've given listeners a really good insight into the key bits of the Warm Homes Plan, what we liked, maybe what we would have liked to see but didn't. And we at CIH will be continuing to put stuff out for our members to help you understand what is going to be happening over the next few months in warm homes and energy efficiency policy. So thank you, Laura. Thank you, Niamh. Hope you've had an enjoyable half an hour listening to this at home. And please remember to keep listening to the CIH podcast when the next one comes out. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.